Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When Ron Vance returned home, he found crime scene tape on his gate and a war waiting behind it. A rogue HOA had claimed his property overnight, but they picked the wrong man to steal from. This wasn't just a fight for land, it was a battle for legacy. And Ron was ready. I pulled into my driveway just after dusk, headlights sweeping across the familiar curve of my 2-acre property. The air smelled like salt and damp pine, the kind of smell that always meant I was home. But as the beams cut across the gate, my heart kicked once, hard. Yellow plastic ribbons crisscrossed the entrance like some kind of crime scene. They weren't the county's, no sheriff stars, no city seal, just bold black letters. Shoreline Sands Estates HOA, authorized access only. My own keypad lock was wrapped in a sticker that read, sealed pending community reallocation. For a second I just sat there, hands on the wheel, trying to compute the absurdity of it. This was my father's land, a squat concrete warehouse and a small brick house he'd built himself back in the 80s. It had never belonged to anyone but us. I killed the engine and got out. The night was humid, mosquitoes already on the prowl, but the little hairs on my arms weren't standing up from bites. They were standing up from anger. Someone had taped an official-looking notice to my front gate. I peeled it off, the paper slick with condensation. By authority of the Shoreline Sands Estates Homeowners Association, the storage facility located at Lot 9 is hereby declared common property. The owner is required to vacate within 15 hours to ensure resident access. Non-compliance will result in sanctions. I laughed out loud, a single sharp bark. Sanctions. Like they were the United Nations. I pulled my phone out and started recording. I filmed the gate, the ribbons, the keypad, the notice, narrating in my best deadpan. Apparently, I've been annexed overnight. Congratulations to Shoreline Sands Estates on your new colony. My breath steamed slightly in the glow of the flashlight as I circled the perimeter. The camera on the corner of my fence blinked green. At least the security system was still running. But the padlock on the side gate hung twisted, like someone had tried a crowbar. My mailbox was ajar, letters half spilled like guts. I called 911. The dispatcher's tone went from polite to weary as soon as I said HOA. A patrol car rolled up 20 minutes later, lights off, engine running. The deputy stepped out, adjusting his belt. "Mr. Vance?" he asked. "That's me," I said, showing him the notice. He skimmed it and shrugged. "Looks like an internal administrative measure. Civil matter. You'll have to handle it in court." I stared at him. "They've sealed off my house," I said. "This isn't a clubhouse, it's my residence." He gave me a sympathetic look that didn't reach his eyes. "Sir, unless there's an immediate threat to life or property, we don't get in the middle of HOA disputes." I bit back the urge to point out that my life and property were pretty obviously being threatened. Instead, I nodded, recorded his badge number on camera, and told him I'd be in touch. As soon as he left, I hit speed dial. "Julie," I said when my attorney answered, "we've got a situation. The HOAs decided my warehouse is now theirs. They've given me 15 hours to leave my own damn house." She was silent for a beat. "Send me everything," she said finally. "Photos, video, that notice. Don't confront anyone yet." Her warning came just in time because a minute later, headlights swept across my gate again. A gleaming SUV rolled up and out stepped Karen Spade herself, new president of Shoreline Sands Estates, dressed like she'd just come from a realtor's open house. She had 2 men with her in matching polo shirts with HOA enforcement embroidered on the chest. A local news van trailed behind, camera already rolling. She smiled at them and then at me, like we were old friends at a ribbon cutting. "Mr. Vance," she called, "we're here to explain the transition. Your facility has been underutilized, and the community voted to repurpose it for residents' needs." I kept the phone up, recording. "This isn't a facility," I said. "It's my private property. You have no jurisdiction here." She tilted her head, sympathy painted on like bad makeup. "I understand this is confusing, but the Residents Association has a duty to manage assets for the greater good. You'll have access to your home until tomorrow morning." One of the polo guys unrolled another ribbon and started stringing it across my driveway. I stepped forward, hand out. "Stop. Touch that gate again, and you're trespassing." The camera caught his pause, the flicker of uncertainty. Karen's smile never wavered. "We're not trespassing," she said sweetly. "We're implementing community standards." Behind her, the news camera's red light glowed. In the humid dark, with the salt air in my throat, I realized I'd stumbled into some kind of HOA theater where I was the villain. I didn't bother arguing. I just said, everything you're doing right now is being recorded and forwarded to my attorney. Karen's smile twitched at the edges. Then we'll see what the court says, she replied. As their SUV rolled away, the ribbons fluttered like warning flags. I stood at my own gate, phone in one hand, keys in the other, my warehouse lights glowing dimly beyond the fence. 15 hours. They actually thought a countdown clock would scare me off my own land. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and muttered to myself, game on. The next morning, I was up before the sun, not because I wanted to be, but because sleep was a joke when someone tried to forcibly evict you from your own damn house. I'd spent the night reviewing every file I had, deeds, tax records, boundary maps, laying them out like I was prepping for a courtroom war. Julie had already filed an emergency notice with the county clerk and submitted a cease and desist to the HOA via email, certified mail, and one very polite but visibly pissed off courier. By 7 a.m., my coffee was half cold, and I was sitting on the tailgate of my truck when the first neighbor texted me, "Hey, is it true the HOA voted to take over your property? We got an email saying you're donating your warehouse for community storage." That right? I stared at the message like it was written in Martian. Donating? I hadn't even donated leftover drywall from a job site, let alone a six-figure piece of land and concrete infrastructure. I opened the HOA's public Facebook group. Didn't follow it, but I'd been lurking since the drama kicked off, and sure enough, there it was. A post from Karen, beaming next to a photoshopped version of my warehouse with the Shoreline Sands logo slapped. On the side, the caption read, "Thanks to the collective support of our community, we are proud to announce the repurposing of an underutilized structure into a shared recreational storage center. This will house kayaks, paddleboards, tools, and more, bringing unity through shared assets." I wanted to punch my phone, but instead I clicked into the comments. A few folks were celebrating, clueless, but some, thank God, were asking questions. Wait, isn't that Ron Vance's place? Did he agree to this? Can we just take over someone's property? One comment in particular stood out. No name, just a burner profile. Ask to see the vote log. This wasn't unanimous. Ask who actually voted. That set off a chain reaction. I decided to help it along. I posted screenshots of my deed, zoning certificate, and a drone image with my property line outlined in neon red. Captioned it with one sentence, "Private property. Never been under HOA jurisdiction. Try again." Julie called 5 minutes later. "It's unraveling already," she said, "but we've got more coming." And boy, did we. At around 10 a.m., I got an encrypted email from a guy calling himself Jimmy from Unit 12. No last name, no phone number, just a series of screenshots from the HOA's internal Slack. There it was, plain as daylight. Karen writing, "We hold a quorum tomorrow morning. We'll include the warehouse as common use retroactively and push it through. He'll be back from his trip too late to stop it. Don't worry, we'll say he verbally agreed." Another line, even better, "He'll scream and call lawyers." Let him. Once it's declared community use, we've got momentum. If we can keep the pressure up for 12 to 15 hours, we'll be able to get residents using it before he even files. I forwarded it all to Julie, and she wrote back 3 words. "We've got them." The HOA's claim was based on a community vote held in a private online chat group with fewer than a dozen participants, all of them HOA board members or spouses. No notice to residents, no ballot process, nothing resembling democratic procedure. And even if they'd voted unanimously, it wouldn't matter. My parcel had its own tax ID, its own plat map, its own easement registration from 1984. But facts don't stop zealots. Around noon, I drove down to the Shoreline Sands HOA office. It was a converted model home with a sign out front that looked suspiciously like it had been ordered on Etsy. I parked out front, walked in with a folder of documents under my arm, and asked to speak with Karen. The woman at the front desk blinked at me. "She's in a closed meeting. Tell her Ronald Vance is here, and I have documentation proving she's committing civil fraud." I was inside the conference room within 2 minutes. Karen was seated at the head of a table, flanked by a few familiar faces, the polo shirt goons from yesterday, and a couple of board members who looked like they'd never experienced conflict stronger than a bad brunch reservation. I placed my folder on the table, opened it like I was laying down cards in a poker game. "This is a certified land registry confirming I'm not under HOA jurisdiction. This is a zoning certificate showing commercial use grandfathered in." This is a time-stamped screenshot of your internal chat logs showing intent to fabricate consent. You've committed trespass, attempted expropriation, and possibly wire fraud, depending on how those votes were logged. Karen's face didn't move for a beat. Then she smiled like I'd brought her gluten-free cookies instead of a legal sledgehammer. You're being very aggressive, Mr. Vance. And you're being extremely criminal, Karen. One of the other board members cleared his throat, clearly rattled. Let's just slow down. No, I cut in. You've got 5 hours left on your little 15-hour eviction fantasy. Either you revoke the notice and publicly correct the post, or the next step is court. I've already filed for injunctive relief. And if I catch one more ribbon on my gate, I'll personally sue for damages and call the sheriff, not the HOA-approved rent-a-cops you sent. Karen still didn't blink. We'll see what the court says. She replied, calm as ice. I left the folder on the table. Let her keep the evidence. She'd need it soon enough. As I walked back to my truck, one of the HOA employees came jogging out after me. Young guy, probably in his 20s, eyes wide. He handed me a flash drive. I'm not supposed to, he whispered. But what they're doing isn't right. It's all in there. Meeting recordings, emails, everything. I took the drive, nodded once, and drove off without a word. Back at home, I opened the gate with the backup code and reset the electronic locks. Then I sat in my chair on the porch with a beer, watching the sun dip low behind the pine trees. Flash drive in one hand, phone in the other, already uploading the files to 3 cloud backups. Let them keep playing games. I was just getting started. They came over the fence just after 3 in the afternoon. I was in the garage, tuning the carburetor on an old Evinrude outboard motor, when my perimeter alarm chirped twice, an alert from the southeast corner. I wiped my hands, grabbed my phone, and pulled up the live feed from my security cameras. 2 men in khaki shorts and matching HOA enforcement polo shirts were climbing over my 8-foot privacy fence like they were in a bad suburban remake of Black Hawk Down. One of them snagged his shirt on the barbed top, cursed, and dropped into my yard, landing on my azaleas. I grabbed my spare access fob and my backup keys. The main gate had been deadlocked the night before as a precaution, but I had 5 different ways onto my property. When you've been working with high-value gear and sketchy hurricane contractors for most of your life, you learn how to cover contingencies. By the time I reached the front door, I saw them making their way toward my warehouse. They didn't knock. They didn't even hesitate. One of them produced bolt cutters and snipped the padlock like he was opening a damn storage unit at auction. The door creaked open, and they marched inside with walkie-talkies clipped to their belts and the kind of puffed-up entitlement only HOA, volunteers, or mall cops ever managed to fully achieve. I slipped in through the side gate, quiet and fast, and stood just outside the warehouse. I could hear them talking. One of them was labeling items with blue masking tape and writing things like COM and shared rec storage. The other guy was stacking my pressure washers and gas generators onto a dolly like it was moving day. I didn't walk in yelling. I didn't raise my voice. I just stepped into the doorway, pointed to the security camera above them, and said, "You have exactly 3 seconds to put that down before you make this felony trespass." They froze. One of them, blonde, mid-30s, the alpha, turned slowly, scanning me like I was the interruption, not the owner. "Sir," he said, "we've been authorized by the HOA board to reallocate community resources." "Community my ass," I said. "This is private property, and you've just committed unlawful entry, destruction of a locking mechanism, and theft in progress. You're being recorded from 5 angles. Want to keep going?" He looked unsure now. The second guy, tall, dark hair, probably newer, lowered the dolly handle and took a step back. Blondie straightened. "We were told you'd left the premises and relinquished the facility." I pulled out my wallet and flashed my driver's license and tax parcel card, still clipped together from the documents I'd prepared the day before. "Does it look like I left?" He started to speak again, but I cut him off. "Don't talk. Get out. Through the same fence you climbed over. Leave everything. If a single socket wrench goes missing, I'm pressing charges." They exchanged a look, then started backing toward the open door. Blondie looked pissed, but not brave enough to escalate. "You'll hear from the board," he muttered. "You'll hear from the sheriff," I replied. "Smile for the cameras." They left. I followed them with my phone camera all the way to the fence. The tall one had to help the other guy back over. I made sure they saw me relock the warehouse with a new padlock. Then I sent the entire video, unedited, time-stamped, to Julie and to the sheriff's office. But the day wasn't done screwing with me yet. 10 minutes later, I was on the phone with Julie giving her the rundown when I noticed a small crowd gathering outside the fence line. Residents, mostly middle-aged couples, and a few kids riding bikes in lazy loops. Karen was there too, standing near the open tailgate of an SUV with glossy printed brochures in hand. She was explaining very loudly how the new community equipment hub was being set up and that there would be open house hours on weekends. I stepped out onto my porch, still holding the phone to my ear. "Do you see this?" I asked Julie. "I'm watching it now," she said. "Someone's already uploaded the break-in footage to Reddit. It's getting traction." Local subreddit, HOA Watch, and next door, Karen spotted me. She waved like we were at a bake sale. "Mr. Vance, so glad to see you're here for the community announcement." I didn't wave back. "You just sent 2 guys to break into my warehouse." She feigned surprise. There must be some confusion. Our contractors were instructed to begin inventorying community resources. It's not a community resource. It's a privately owned commercial building on a parcel that's never belonged to your HOA, a few residents murmured. One of the older guys, someone I'd seen jogging at dawn for years, spoke up. "Karen, did Ron actually agree to this?" Karen's expression didn't even twitch. There was consensus. We had a virtual meeting. "Everything's documented." I barked a bitter laugh. "You mean your secret group chat, where you plan to lock me out and hold a ribbon cutting before I got home?" She stiffened. "You're being combative, Ron. And you're being criminal." "The sheriff has the footage." "Keep talking, Karen. Maybe you can explain this to a judge." She turned her back to me, smiling at the crowd again. "Some people have trouble adjusting when the community grows and changes." "Let's focus on progress." Julie's voice came through my phone again. "She's leaning into it. Wants to bait you into reacting on camera. Not gonna happen," I said. But then 2 squad cars pulled up, lights flashing, no sirens. An officer I didn't recognize stepped out, walked toward me and asked, "Sir, we received a report that you made threats against HOA personnel during a compliance operation." I looked at him like he'd told me the sky was green. "You mean when I caught 2 men in my building, stealing my equipment?" "Allegedly," he said. "Mind if we ask you a few questions?" I nodded toward the security camera mounted on the porch beam. "Everything's recorded. Would you like to watch the footage with me, or would you prefer to keep playing HOA lapdog?" His jaw twitched, but he followed me inside. 15 minutes later, he left without a word. No charges, no arrest, no apology either. Outside, the crowd was dispersing. Karen was already in her SUV, her eyes flicking toward me through the tinted glass as she shut the door. She'd underestimated me, and she'd made it personal. The next 48 hours were a legal meat grinder. Julie filed for an emergency injunction first thing Monday morning, backed by a mountain of evidence. Video, photos, declarations from neighbors, historical plat maps, even notarized affidavits from the original developer's son confirming that my land had never ever been part of the Shoreline Sands Estates HOA. We were armed to the teeth with documentation and precedent. We weren't just playing defense anymore. We were launching a damn counteroffensive. So when the judge denied our injunction hearing less than 4 hours after filing, citing insufficient evidence of ongoing or irreparable harm, it felt like getting shot with a confetti cannon, colorful, humiliating, and utterly useless. Julie was fuming. "That ruling doesn't make sense," she snapped, pacing across her office. "They broke into your building. Twice. You've got footage, damage, trespassers with bolt cutters, HOA goons pretending to be law enforcement, and somehow that's not irreparable harm. Irritation," I corrected flatly. "Maybe some mild character assassination. This isn't a sitcom, Ron. Something's off." She wasn't wrong. It felt like a door had been quietly locked behind us. I started looking into the judge, one Marshall Keaton, a well-groomed, gray-haired incumbent who made a name for himself in the real estate development boom of the early 21st century. Didn't take long to find an article linking him to Karen's former real estate brokerage. They'd worked in the same firm for 5 years before she retired into full-time community meddling. That alone didn't prove bias, but it stank like low tide in August. Julie dug deeper and found something even better, a public campaign donor list. Keaton's last election had been partially funded by a group of property investors, one of whom turned out to be Karen's brother-in-law. Add to that the fact that Shoreline Sands HOA attorney Deborah Knox had been Karen's partner in the real estate firm until about 4 years ago. Conflict of interest. Try full-blown incestuous litigation swamp. We filed for judicial recusal that afternoon, but Keaton refused to step down voluntarily. No demonstrable personal bias, his response read. Julie laughed bitterly. Right. And no demonstrable rainfall during a hurricane either, I guess. While we wrangled in legal purgatory, HOA wasn't slowing down. Someone on the board, a moron presumably, started handing out printed flyers across the neighborhood, advertising free access to shared community storage. In big bold letters, available now. Below that, a picture of my warehouse, cropped and filtered to look like a luxury amenity. They even listed hours of access like it was a damn gym. That would have been funny if it wasn't terrifying. Sure enough, 2 teens showed up at my gate the next morning trying to get in. We're here for our paddleboards, one said, holding a laminated flyer like it was a VIP pass to a pool party. Try the marina, I muttered. This isn't a rec center. They didn't argue, probably because I looked like I hadn't slept in 2 days, which I hadn't, and I was holding a torque wrench in one hand and a GoPro in the other. Julie called again that evening. I've got a contact in the county clerk's office. She says someone from HOA submitted a petition to amend the local zoning map. They're trying to claim your warehouse was inadvertently omitted from HOA jurisdiction during the last boundary review. My jaw clenched so hard I thought I'd chip a molar. They're rewriting history now? They're trying, she confirmed. And I'll bet you anything they're using altered site maps from the developer's original plan. We need to beat them to the punch. Get ahead of this before someone in zoning rubber stamps the whole thing. So I did what I always do when cornered. I called in a few favors. One of my old logistics buddies, a former Army supply officer named Wexler, worked as an archival consultant for the county library system. We met at a diner off Route 34, and over burnt coffee and the best pancakes in town, he slid a USB drive across the table. Digitized plat maps, aerial surveys, and zoning indexes from 1979 to 2021. Layered by year, geotagged, certified, and time-stamped. If they say your property was ever under HOA control, they're full of shit. That drive was gold. Not only did it show my lot clearly carved out from HOA boundaries since inception, it also had high-res aerial shots proving that my warehouse had been fenced off and used commercially for decades. One of them even showed my old man standing next to a delivery truck, waving at the camera like a ghost, whispering "sue their asses." We sent copies of everything to the zoning board, the local assessor's office, and the state property registry. Then Julie did something borderline nuclear. She submitted a complaint to the county prosecutor's office requesting an investigation into fraudulent municipal filings and abuse of power by a registered homeowners association. That opened a whole new can of worms. The prosecutor's office responded in under 24 hours with a request for voluntary cooperation sent to the HOA. Translated, "We're watching you now, very closely." And just like that, things shifted. The HOA office closed for maintenance. Karen stopped showing up in public. Their Facebook page went dark, and one of the enforcement guys, Blondie, was seen moving out of his townhouse. I wasn't celebrating yet, but the air felt different. Less smug, more nervous. I spent that night at home on the back porch, watching the warehouse lights glow steady and silent in the Florida humidity. My dad's tools were right where I left them, my boat trailers untouched. And for the first time in weeks, nobody was trying to tell me that my property belonged to the community. Not yet anyway. They thought I'd fold under legal pressure. Most people do. Bureaucracy is exhausting by design. It's meant to wear you down until you'd rather give up your rights than file one more notarized form. But I've spent decades managing supply chains in war zones. Compared to Afghan customs agents and hurricane-ravaged ports in Louisiana, a rogue HOA with a taste for petty tyranny was just a bad Tuesday. I got to work. Real work. The next morning, I contacted the county property tax assessor and submitted a formal challenge to the zoning revision HOA was trying to sneak through. I backed it with every map, aerial photo, and document Wexler had given me, plus a notarized affidavit outlining the exact history of the warehouse, complete with equipment manifests, license renewals, and dated service logs going back nearly 30 years. I wasn't just some guy with a building. I was a one-man logistics nerve center, legally protected and fully documented. But I wasn't just playing defense anymore. That afternoon, I made 2 calls that would change everything. The first was to a contact in the Florida Department of Business and Professional Regulation, An old Coast Guard buddy, Mike Vargas, now worked in the state licensing division. I told him what was going on, sent him the entire packet of evidence, and asked, off the record, if he'd ever heard of a homeowners association trying to seize commercial property through internal votes and community reinterpretation. He called me back 30 minutes later, laughing so hard he could barely talk. I'm flagging their corporate license for review, he said. That HOA's a registered nonprofit. If they're trying to expand jurisdiction or use property for profit without a legal claim, that's grounds for forced audit. Hell, possibly criminal inquiry. Bless your bureaucratic heart, I said, and meant it. The second call was to the county building inspector's office. I requested a full review of all HOA construction projects from the past 18 months, citing discrepancies in reporting, possible misuse of funds, and the unlawful repurposing of non-HOA land. I signed the complaint under penalty of perjury. That same day, an inspector showed up at the HOA's administrative annex, which, for the record, was just Karen's converted garage. They weren't expecting it. A neighbor texted me a photo. The inspector holding up a clipboard while Karen stood at the curb in tennis whites, looking like she was being audited by the IRS mid-lunch. By the end of the week, everything started to crumble. Turns out Shoreline Sands Estates had a long and messy paper trail. They'd authorized multiple landscaping and beautification projects over the past year with no vendor transparency, missing invoices, and work that had never been performed. One contractor listed on the books, Bayfront Development Partners, didn't even exist. The address on file led to a P.O. box in another county, and guess whose name was linked to that box? Karen Spade's niece. The building inspector filed a formal report to the county commission, citing irregularities and recommending an external audit of HOA operations. Meanwhile, the state licensing board escalated the flag on their nonprofit status to a full compliance investigation. Karen tried to play damage control, but her defenses were crumbling faster than a sugar cube in a thunderstorm. And just when things were starting to burn around her, someone from inside turned up the heat. His name was Luis Payne, one of the HOA board members. He knocked on my door one evening, looking nervous as hell, like a man who realized the ship was going down and decided he didn't want to drown with the captain. "I've got copies of everything," he said. "Meeting minutes, emails, expense logs, stuff the rest of the board never saw." I let him in, sat him at my kitchen table, and poured him a glass of whatever whiskey I had that wasn't from a gas station. He spilled everything. According to Luis, Karen had been pushing for control of my warehouse for over 6 months, ever since she discovered through a title search that my land had never formally been declared outside the HOA's scope. She called it an administrative gray zone and told the board she'd found a loophole to make it community accessible. Her plan was simple and disgusting: fake consensus, create urgency, seize control, and flip the building into a profit-generating community resource under the HOA's banner. The goal wasn't kayaks or paddleboards, it was rentals. Karen had already drafted a leasing agreement with a third-party management company, same one her niece ran out of Tampa. She'd planned to rent the warehouse to contractors and tradesmen at competitive HOA rates, funneling the money back into the HOA's Community Enrichment Fund, which was really just a black hole of unmonitored spending. Luis showed me the document. It was real. Drafted, signed, dated 2 weeks before they voted to annex my property. When I asked him why he was coming forward now, Luis just looked tired. "She crossed a line," he said. "I didn't sign up for this. She told us you'd left the property, that it was vacant. Then I saw your face on the news. That's when I knew we were being used." I shook his hand. "You just made yourself a star witness." We sent everything to Julie. She was already building a case for civil damages and was now ready to escalate it to criminal conspiracy, wire fraud, and intentional misrepresentation. With Luis's testimony and the documents in hand, we had enough to launch a legal cruise missile directly at the HOA. The county prosecutor's office confirmed they were initiating a formal investigation. The letterhead alone made me smile. Things were no longer under Karen's control. They were under scrutiny. And scrutiny is something that snakes like her don't survive for long. It didn't take long for the dominoes to start falling. Within 72 hours of Luis handing over that flash drive, things went from shady to downright radioactive. The county prosecutor's office issued a formal subpoena to Shoreline Sands Estates HOA for financial records, communications, and internal voting documentation. The language was precise and cold: possible civil fraud, misrepresentation of governance authority, and unlawful appropriation of private assets. Karen tried to play it cool. She issued a newsletter to residents, printed and hand-delivered because their website had mysteriously gone offline, claiming that certain individuals with a grudge were spreading unsubstantiated rumors meant to divide our beautiful community. She signed it "With civic love, Karen Spade, President, Shoreline Sands Estates." I framed it right next to the new "No Trespassing" private property sign I posted at the gate. Laminated, stainless steel, bolted to concrete. That weekend, I hosted a little get-together, grill fired up, lights strung between the trees, some music playing low, just a handful of neighbors. The ones who'd stayed silent for too long were starting to come around. They brought beer, baked goods, and whispered apologies. "I didn't know what she was doing," one man muttered over his second plate of ribs. "We just thought it was some zoning thing. She made it sound like you were letting the property go. She lied to everyone," another added. "We should have asked questions." I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The real revenge was coming, and it wore a suit. The following Monday, Karen was served, right there in front of the HOA clubhouse, which, let's remember, used to be a model home until someone had the bright idea to pretend it was a town hall. A plainclothes investigator walked right up to her little folding table where she was organizing some kind of community beautification committee and handed her a sealed envelope. She read it, blanched, and then tried to laugh. "This is a misunderstanding," she said loudly to the group around her. "An administrative check. It's routine." No one said anything. By Wednesday, the audit team from the Department of Business and Professional Regulation rolled up. 2 state cars parked in front of her house for nearly 4 hours. They left with 5 boxes of records and a desktop computer wrapped in plastic. Her office hours sign disappeared the next day. Julie was already building out the civil suit. Damages for unauthorized access to my property, destruction of private locks, misrepresentation of ownership, and interference with commercial operations. Then came the kicker: loss of income due to public misrepresentation. She tied it to the flyers, the social media posts, and the HOA's verbal instructions to residents to use the shared facility freely. Every one of those incidents was now another nail in Karen's legal coffin. We demanded $630,000 in restitution and damages. It was aggressive, sure, but not unwarranted. The warehouse had been off limits for over 2 weeks. I'd missed contract pickups, storage payments, and 2 inspections for a licensing renewal. I wasn't running a lemonade stand. I managed specialized outdoor equipment for marine contractors, and lost business at that scale wasn't theoretical. It was real, documented, and provable. Karen's lawyer tried to lowball us with a settlement offer, $65,000 and a signed apology letter. Julie nearly spit out her coffee. Tell her she can keep the letter and eat the ink. Meanwhile, the news caught on. A local investigative journalist picked up the story, headlined it, "HOA from Hell, When Homeowners Overstep." The article included photos of my fence wrapped in HOA tape, side-by-sides of property maps, quotes from Luis, and one particularly damning excerpt from Karen's internal messages about how to create irreversible occupancy before legal challenge. It went viral. HOWatch.com picked it up. Reddit blew up. Next door was a war zone. Half the community was begging Karen to resign. The other half was wondering if they were next on her little empire-building checklist. And then, finally, the final blow landed. The county prosecutor, backed by findings from the state audit, issued formal charges against Karen Spade. 4 felony counts: unlawful entry, falsification of legal documents, abuse of non-profit status, and conspiracy to defraud a property owner. Her mugshot was in the paper the next morning. Perfect hair, dead eyes, not a single HOA pin in sight. The enforcers she'd hired, both charged as co-conspirators. One of them had a prior on his record. The other immediately flipped, claiming they'd been misled and pressured into thinking it was authorized community action. Nice try, guys, but it didn't stop there. Under court order, a full forensic audit of Shoreline Sands Estates HOA was launched. Bank accounts frozen, meetings suspended. The board was dissolved by special judicial order after it was discovered that multiple votes had been falsified, bylaws altered without resident approval, and funds misappropriated into shell vendors, many of which were linked back to Karen's extended family. In other words, the HOA was finished. Shoreline Sands Estates was placed under court-appointed receivership. A third-party administrator was brought in to sort the books, handle restitution, and prepare the HOA for either complete dissolution or a full community-wide rechartering. Me? I was finally free to weld a new gate on my warehouse, free to repaint the front of the building without Karen whining about aesthetic uniformity, free to park my damn fishing boat wherever I pleased without getting passive-aggressive flyers about curb appeal, and just to make sure no one ever got confused again, I installed a custom sign on the front gate. Brushed steel, laser-etched, private property. Trespassers will be shredded by legal documents. The best part? It glows in the dark. Karen's trial began exactly 111 days after the first ribbon showed up on my gate. By that point, Shoreline Sands Estates was a ghost of its former self. The manicured front lawns had started to look a little shaggy, the newsletters had stopped, and the once weekly yoga in the clubhouse parking lot had been replaced by uneasy silence. Nobody wanted to admit they'd voted for her, and those who had were either selling fast or keeping their heads down like they were living under martial law. HOA signs had been taken down. The enforcement golf cart was parked in the community dumpster. Meanwhile, I had a front row seat to the unraveling. Karen stood trial on multiple counts: criminal trespass, falsification of records, abuse of nonprofit status, fraud, conspiracy to misappropriate private property, and, after some final evidence from Luis and another last-minute witness, attempted racketeering. The courtroom was packed with reporters, residents, and at least 3 camera crews. Julie and I arrived early each day. She carried a thick leather briefcase. I carried a folder with 1 sheet of paper, the original 1984 deed from my father, signed and sealed, the document that started this whole war. Luis testified first. Calm, articulate, and visibly uncomfortable, but undeniably credible. He walked the jury through the group chats, the internal memos, the secret board meetings that had taken place over wine and shrimp cocktails while they planned how to reallocate my property without my knowledge or consent. Then came the financial expert, appointed by the court, neutral. He explained how over $200,000 had been funneled into bogus projects, most of them tied to shell companies with connections to Karen's family. HOA dues paid for landscaping that never happened, decorative fountains that were never installed, and a community improvement fund that might as well have been Karen's vacation account. The defense tried their best to spin it, claimed Karen was passionate, overextended, misguided in her zeal to improve the neighborhood. They even tried to play the gender card. She faced hostility, her attorney said. She was trying to lead in a male-dominated environment. I nearly choked. If this was oppression, I wanted my HOA overlord to come with less hairspray and fewer shell companies. Then came the final nail in the coffin. The state called Cynthia Moore, a zoning clerk from the county office. Under oath, she testified that Karen had attempted twice to bribe her into slipping through zoning changes that would clean up historical oversights. Cynthia had recorded the second conversation. It wasn't subtle. Karen's voice was crystal clear on the tape. We just need this one parcel included. It's adjacent, mostly unused, and no one's going to make a fuss. We can provide support. Discreetly, the courtroom went silent. You could hear the judge inhale. Julie leaned over to me. She's done. The jury didn't take long. Guilty on all counts. Sentencing was set for 2 weeks later. At the hearing, Karen stood stiff as a mannequin while the judge read out the punishment. 12 years in state prison with no possibility of parole for at least 6, restitution for damages, community ban from any future HOA leadership role, personal liability for civil claims still pending. Her enforcers got lighter sentences, 4 years each for trespass, conspiracy, and impersonation of public officials. They cried in court. Karen didn't shed a tear. The fallout was swift. The state moved to dissolve Shoreline Sands Estates HOA entirely. Under Florida law, a nonprofit homeowners association found guilty of systemic fraud and unlawful governance can be disbanded by court order. All assets, bank accounts, real estate holdings, even the office furniture, were auctioned off to pay legal fees and restitution. Some of that money came to me. The civil settlement awarded me full market value for business losses over 3 months. Compensation for damages to equipment and security infrastructure, additional payout for defamation and unlawful restriction of access to property, plus punitive damages for intentional emotional distress, Final total, just under $630,000. Julie smiled when the wire came through. Your dad would have been proud, she said, but honestly, I wasn't happy. Not yet, because there was still one final thing to do. 2 weeks after the trial, I drove out to a metal shop on the edge of town, one of those places where the sign's been sun-bleached to hell, but the work is honest and the welds are clean. Inside, a guy named Tito handed me a long, narrow package wrapped in butcher paper. No refunds if they sue you for defamation, he said with a smirk. They'd have to survive the last lawsuit first, I replied. Back home, I unpacked the sign like it was a religious relic. 4 feet wide, brushed stainless steel, laser-etched with clean black lettering that caught the afternoon light just right. I bolted it to the concrete column at the warehouse gate with a torque wrench and a grin. Private property. Trespassers will be shredded by legal documents. It glowed in the dark. Literally, we'd added phosphorescent coating. Because why not? The neighbors started walking by more often after that, some curious, others sheepish. A few finally worked up the courage to wave or say hi. One older couple, the Donnellys, brought me a pie and stood awkwardly on the porch. We just wanted to say sorry, Mr. Donnelly said. We should have spoken up sooner. You still can, I told him. There's a hearing next month to reorganize the community charter. Show up, speak, fix it. And they did. The county appointed a temporary property manager, neutral, state-licensed, and deeply uninterested in neighborhood drama. He sent out ballots to all residents offering a vote on whether to recharter the HOA under strict new guidelines or dissolve it permanently and switch to municipal maintenance for shared infrastructure. The vote wasn't even close. 78% voted for dissolution. No more HOA. The roads would be maintained by the county. Trash would be picked up on Thursdays instead of Wednesdays. And the community pool, once Karen's sacred jewel of suburban control, was to be locked and sold off to settle outstanding debts. That's when the apologies really started coming in. The couple who'd let their kid hop my fence looking for community paddleboards. The woman who once emailed me about removing the camouflage netting from my boat trailer because it disrupted the aesthetic flow. Even the guy who signed the fake vote list under pressure from Karen. He showed up with 2 six-packs and helped me fix a leak in the warehouse roof. I didn't forgive them right away. I wasn't that gracious. But I listened. That was a start. Luis, the whistleblower, found a new job in a different HOA across the state. This one's small, transparent, and actually accountable. He still texts me sometimes with jokes like, 0 arrests at today's meeting. Progress. As for Karen, she's currently serving time in a low-security state facility. Word is she's petitioned for early release due to emotional hardship. The judge laughed her out of the courtroom. Good. I still get the occasional letter from reporters asking for interviews. The guy who beat the HOA. The man who wouldn't leave. I always say no. This wasn't about fame. It wasn't even really about the money. It was about principle, about property, about legacy. My father built that warehouse with his own hands. He didn't pour concrete and weld steel beams just so some petty tyrant in white capris could turn it into a kayak clubhouse. He taught me that your land is the one thing in this world you don't let anyone take. Not a bank, not a developer, and sure as hell not an HOA with delusions of grandeur. So I stayed. I fought, and I won. The camera system still runs. The gates still lock at night, but for the first time in months, I sleep easy. The kind of sleep you get when you know that no one's going to put a ribbon across your life and call it theirs.